Hello.
Our story begins on Mandalore, shortly after the death of Duchess Satine. Obi Wan was being escorted to a Mandalorian prison by Maul's loyalists. The purpose of this, in Maul's mind, was to make Obi Wan suffer in agony over his failure to protect Satine. Kenobi was thinking about everything that had passed. He had a chance to save Satine, but he didn't, and it was eating away in his mind. Obi Wan watched the vessel cruise across the city, but his mind was left inside the throne room, where he watched Maul choke Satine and then kill her. Perhaps his loyalties to the Jedi Code had gone too far. Satine may have been upset at him if he broke that code to save her, but she would at the very least be alive. Obi-Wan couldn't shake his inner turmoil. The scenario played over and again, watching Satine choke there for what felt like minutes and doing absolutely nothing. If he acted in anger, he could have lost himself or hurt her, but if he acted at all, then maybe she would at the very least be alive. That was a much better reality than the one he lived with at the moment. Her death, whether he liked it or not, was on his hands. The sorrow of this loss ate away at him, and perhaps that was the greatest irony in all of this. He let his fear of attachments control him when it came to not acting, and yet, after all of it, it was his attachments to her that ate away at him now. He couldn't undo it. She was gone. He could never go back and save the love of his life. Obi-Wan looked sadly at the ground as they arrived outside the prison center as they exited the speeder. Kenobi was then shocked when a number of blue-armored Mandalorians came upon his position. The leader of the group introduced herself as Bo-Katan. Obi-Wan immediately could tell that this was Satine's sister, but his own grief was clouding his judgment. As Bo killed the other Mandalorians, she prepared to equip him with a jetpack. Obi-Wan looked over to her and told her that he couldn't follow her. She asked why, telling him that they didn't have time to debate this. Maul's Mandalorians would be coming for them. Obi-Wan expressed that Maul would submerge this planet into civil war. It would undo decades worth of work done by Satine. At the very least, if he was incapable of saving her, then they could preserve her legacy. That was something. At least allow her memory to stand strong. Allow her Mandalore to remain leader of the Neutral Systems Coalition, not lose all of his allies again. Obi-Wan felt this unconquerable guilt, and he couldn't imagine what fate would beset Mandalore without Satine. She set their people up with a utopia, one that led a neutral system coalition. Without her, all of their allies would vanish into the twilight. If news of this civil war made galactic headlines, Mandalore's territory would shrink overnight, and their political influence would shatter into nothingness again. He pleaded with Bo that they had to make things right. She looked to him with a little bit of fear. She didn't have the troops to sustain a conflict with Gar Saxon and his allies, but she knew he was right. If Satine were alive, she would stand tall to her last breath for Mandalore. That's what she did when those pirates arrived. She stood her ground, and it would defame her legacy to do anything other than fight for Mandalore. Bo thought for a moment as Obi-Wan got her to focus on him. He told her that if Maul took over, Mandalore would be left on his own. She might not have the manpower to fight Maul, but they had the courage to do it. If he could distract Maul and Savage, then they could capture the castle, and from there they could reclaim Mandalore for themselves. Not for nothing, Bo was next in line. She was her sister's predecessor. She would need to be strong enough to rise from the ashes of this conflict. They didn't need for it to escalate into a full-blown civil war. Mandalore had seen enough of that in the last 30 years. Bo agreed with Obi-Wan as she told her guard to gather their forces. They would make a concentrated move against the castle. If they could capture it, that was one step closer to total victory. Obi-Wan prepared his jetpack and moved out. Across the city, inside the throne room of the former Duchess, Maul was sitting with triumph on his face. He knew what he would do. Obi-Wan would remain in that prison for the rest of his life, constantly tormented by the memory of allowing Satine to die in front of him. Maul was thinking about all the ways he would continue to remind his former foe about how he failed Satine in her final moments. It'd be joyous watching the Jedi Master struggle with pulls to the darkness. As he was contemplating these victorious thoughts, he felt a swift change in the Force. He called out the word Master under his breath, as his two Mandalorian guards were lifted from the ground. They were hoisted into the air as a shadow marched into the room. Palpatine relished in each moment of their suffering, as the Mandalorian guards suffocated until their last breath, and they were dropped from dozens of feet in the air. Palpatine looked around, congratulating Maul on his accomplishments. Maul moved to his knees quickly, telling Palpatine that he used his training to survive, having built all of this in hopes to return by Sidious's side. The Dark Lord of the Sith wasn't a fool. The rule of two forbid rivalries, and due to the fact that Maul had been replaced by Dooku, and of course the fact that Maul was working with Savage, it was clear they were not going to serve him, rather attempt to fight him. It was pretty funny in Palpatine's eyes. He could tell from the rush of panic in Maul's voice that he wasn't prepared for this. There were no contingencies for his former apprentice, nothing to threaten Palpatine with. For example, while Maul didn't know Palpatine was Chancellor, he could at the very least attempt to say he figured it out, threaten to expose his identity to the Jedi, at least something to make this fight feel a little more challenging for the Sith Lord. Palpatine was here to get his money's worth. It wasn't like he got to be a Sith Lord all that often, so he was truthfully disappointed that Maul didn't come prepared for the inevitable. Unless, of course, his former apprentice truly thought that this little routine would work on him. But Palpatine knew Maul wasn't that dull, even though he thought lesser of him. As they were speaking, Sidious informed his former pupil that he had become a rival, throwing them up into the air. This was a show of Palpatine's strength. He was here to win, nothing would change that, but Palpatine needed to get the most out of this experience. He couldn't travel all the way from Coruscant to win this fight in less than a minute. He needed to feed off the fear of Savage and Maul. He needed to pool on their suffering, same as he did the Mandalorians before he entered. So Sidious dropped the two Sith to the ground as he laughed, igniting his lightsabers, as Maul and Savage did the same. Before the Sith could engage in this battlefield, there was a sound of blaster fire emanating from outside their chambers. Sidious didn't think much of it, because to him, it didn't matter. He knew Satine was gone, and truthfully, that was the only victor he really needed on Mandalore. Without the Duchess, their political system would be in ruins. She was far too valuable to the neutral systems, and without her voice, it'd be easy to overstep boundaries with Mandalore. Imperial control in the system would be seamless once the Republic fell. To Sidious, that was triumph. The blaster fire only articulated the eternal fate of Mandalore. They would be lost fighting with each other, when their real enemy was him. But too dull, as always, to see who the real foe was. The Sith engaged in the middle of the throne room. Palpatine blocked and parried each strike. His moves were effortless, and he was really just playing with his food. It was enjoyable too. He ducked and spun out of the way, blocking when he needed to and watching Savage and Maul struggle. Sidious understood that this would become a real competition once Savage was killed, but at the moment, Maul saw his brother as a liability. It was easy to see in their fight. Maul was working to defend his brother subconsciously. When Savage was no longer a part of the equation, Maul would use all of his skills, which were definitely admirable but nothing in comparison to Sidious's. The duelists continued across the pristine floors of Satine's throne room, and before the Dark Lord could thrust these fools from the chambers themselves, another lightsaber ignited. Sidious usually wasn't one for distractions, but this seriously caught him off guard. As he narrowly avoided a strike and tossed Savage across the floor, watching his boots slide, he turned back. Obi-Wan's lightsaber was the one ignited as he looked at Sidious, Maul, and Savage. While Kenobi and Bo were here to kill the Zabrak brothers, Obi-Wan understood who their real opponent was. He could deal with Maul and Savage later. This fight, the one with Sidious, could determine the fate of the Clone War. Sidious looked at Obi-Wan and a wave of fear filled his body. Not of Obi-Wan himself. He wouldn't ever fear Kenobi, but he feared the thought of Kenobi surviving this fight and learning his identity. That was a mix-up that Savage and Maul didn't have against him. All of a sudden, playtime turned into a real fight. Sidious readied himself as he watched his three opponents non-verbally decide that they were on the same team. Obi-Wan said something inaudible to Bo before looking back at the three Sith, preparing himself. Bo ran out of the room into the firefight raging outside the throne room, as the four duelists move in. Savage was uneasy. He could tell that his brother and Kenobi made a temporary alliance, but he wasn't sure where he stood anymore. All of these opponents had skills that he wasn't yet familiar with, but truthfully, this gave him more confidence. Kenobi and Maul were strong duelists, so he could use them to his own advantage. Sidious waited for the first move to be made, but it didn't come, as Savage, Maul, and Kenobi moved closer together. This was the last thing that Obi-Wan wanted, but killing Sidious was far more important than his personal attachments. Everything was silent aside from the growl of their lightsabers and the ambience of the Mandalorian civil war kicking off. Sidious watched the feet of his opponents. Savage wasn't steady, Maul was eager, and Kenobi was sturdy. How interesting. Sidious could tell where this was going as Maul launched in. His movement was followed by Savage and Obi-Wan. Kenobi flipped forms, using Savage to balance his movement. He wasn't trusting of Maul in the slightest, but they were in this together for the time being. Savage's brute strength threw Palpatine off balance, which Obi-Wan exerted Form 4 against, before transferring back into Form 3, to make sure Sidious couldn't penetrate his defense. Their blades clashed again and again, dancing around the throne room as Sidious's two blades made their mark against each opponent. Palpatine really wanted to kill one of them, and Savage was his target, but now he was thinking Maul or Kenobi was his target. Due to the effectiveness of the more experienced duelists, he couldn't actually get a hit on Savage. The Dark Lord tried to do anything he could, but the truth is, Obi-Wan's perfect defense matched pace with the moves of Savage and Maul. Without having to focus on protecting his brother, Maul could actually use his best moves against Palpatine. Only issue is, Palpatine taught him all those moves. Their fight progressed, each duelist getting more sloppy. The fight was dragging on, and no one was making progress. As Sidious prepared to make an escape, the Mandalorian Civil War broke through the doors in a burst of plasma. It threw the four opponents from their feet, and it revealed Obi-Wan the truth of Palpatine's identity. He couldn't run now. Sidious was preparing for the Great Escape, but now Kenobi needed to die, and despite how badly Maul wanted to kill Obi-Wan, this was the perfect opportunity to get revenge against his former master. He knew how badly Sidious needed Kenobi dead. While he too could inform the Republic about Palpatine's identity, the public would likely trust a Jedi Master, like Obi-Wan, rather than a former Sith assassin. Maul used Sidious's rage to his advantage. Kenobi backpedaled into defense as Sidious swung aggressively at him, trying to kill him as quickly as he could so that he could escape. While Palpatine was doing this, he blocked strikes from Maul and Savage. Each swing he took, he got an inch closer to ending Obi-Wan's life, but the perfect defense was just enough until he was thrown from his feet. Kenobi slammed across the ground before looking up to see Sidious lunging through the air and swinging down. He threw his lightsaber up and blocked a strike from Sidious, as the Sith Lord was shoved backwards. Savage then swung heavily, forcing Sidious to duck. As he turned around, he looked into Maul's eyes. He could feel cold. He then looked down. The heat of the lightsaber was so hot that to the touch it felt cold. Palpatine fell to his knees as he looked at the darksaber and crimson lightsaber sticking through his chest. Obi-Wan was momentarily shocked, but he got to his feet as Savage threw his blade at him. Behind Obi-Wan came Bo's allies. The true Mandalorians were here to save their Jedi ally. Maul and Savage blocked blaster bolts from the Mandalorians as a tired Obi-Wan swung forward. He was blocked by Savage before being thrown backwards by the brute strength. As Maul prepared to swing down, a jetpack sped past, throwing Maul from his feet, and from his hand, the darksaber. Bo-Katan used a grapple to grab it as she ignited the weapon. Maul hissed as he moved forward, equally as tired as Obi-Wan. Savage was left in the middle, as various Mandalorians surrounded him, shooting grapples into his shoulders, legs, torso, and neck. He was pulled in every which direction as he tried to break free. His brother behind him defended himself from the darksaber. Obi-Wan saw Savage as he raged, before the cables electrified, shocking him into submission, before one of Bo's night owls finished him off with a blast to the cranium. Kenobi ran forward swinging at Maul, before taking a metal boot to the throat, which completely immobilized him. Obi-Wan coughed up his lungs like Grievous as he tumbled to the ground. Bo continued swinging forward. Maul's superior combat experience as a duelist helped him hear him, but Bo, after having watched Pre Vizsla lose to Maul, knew how she could beat him. She played the moment over and again in her mind over the course of the last few days, envisioning how she might kill Maul herself. She leapt up, faking that she would use her jetpack. Maul bit the bait as he preemptively swung above her head. It cut off a strand or two of her red hair as she threw one of her wrist rockets into his face. Maul screamed out in pain as he stumbled back, catching a glimpse of his dead brother's corpse slumped over. Maul turned back, swinging forward, his blade catching Bo's wrist, which was protected by Beskar, as she swung the darksaber forward with her non-dominant arm, catching Maul in the stomach as he winced in pain, the same strike Maul levied against Qui-Gon Jinn. He tried clearing his vision, but she was filled with vengeance. Obi-Wan looked up as Bo swung her blade across Maul's chest, and he dropped to the ground immediately. Victory had consumed the Jedi and the Mandalorians. Bo eventually made sure Obi-Wan was alright and sent him off to Coruscant with the 3 dead Sith. While he didn't claim a single kill on any of them, he could still technically tell the Council that Sith Lords were his speciality. He had now a confirmed Maul death alongside that of Palpatine and Savage. Mandalore would return to a semi-normal state, because Bo had the darksaber. She was technically recognized as their leader. Also, she was the Duchess's sister. The criminal syndicates were coming to the planet, but they were blindsided by Bo-Katan and her Mandalorians. Those who served Maul returned to serve her, due to her winning the Darksaber in combat. This didn't mean that someone wouldn't try to overthrow Clan Kryze, but Bo made sure that any of those potential dangers were dealt with. In the meantime, Kenobi would be transported back to Coruscant with his dead Sith. He'd bring their dead bodies to the Jedi High Council and inform them of everything, including the nature of the Mandalorian government. He did suggest oversight with Bo as their new leader, but even more focus on how the Jedi should approach the Republic. Master Plo pondered if they truly needed to investigate the Republic. Palpatine might have been a valid point. The Jedi had a long-standing alliance with the Republic, though there was a fear that the Jedi's political enemies were growing by the day. Perhaps it couldn't hurt, but they needed to approach this delicately. Yoda agreed with Plo's notion. There wouldn't be a need to investigate the Senate. However, they had to be careful when it came to informing them about how they found out Palpatine was dead. As for Kenobi, he would be recognized by his peers for assisting in the death of 3 Sith, a feat not accomplished by any Jedi in over a millennium, at the very least. Obi-Wan was appreciative, but his thoughts were left on how Bo would maintain the power of Mandalore. Luckily, she wasn't in much danger. Without Maul, the criminal syndicates broke away from Mandalore, not seeing the value in the system. This was aided in the fact that they no longer had the backing of the other criminal syndicates. They didn't start fighting with each other, but they didn't exactly have each other's backs. The Jedi, on the other hand, the day after Obi-Wan revealed the death of the Sith to the Council, Yoda, Plo, and Mace would approach Amedda about the developments involving Palpatine. He informed the Jedi that they could have full transparency with the investigation, but requested that they specifically memorialize Palpatine as an individual having a stroke or a heart attack, giving the public no reason to fear his death as a conspiracy. Moss believed it would unite the people against the Separatists and give the Jedi more political leverage. The Jedi bit the bait. Palpatine had plans in case he died during the Clone Wars. Sidious knew the technology to resurrect him wasn't where it needed to be yet, so Amedda was given a strict set of contingency orders to ensure he could return once the Empire was created. Sidious assumed that he would die by Dooku's hands if he did die. The surprise was that it came at the hands of former Sith and Mandalorians. Point being though, Palpatine didn't want Dooku to assume control over his realm, so it was told to Amedda how he could destroy Dooku and win the Clone Wars instantly. The blueprints were handed over to Moss on how he could maintain control over the Republic, turn it into an empire, and prepare the galaxy for Palpatine's own return. Moss was loyal to a fault, but truthfully, he wasn't even sure if he wanted to bring Palpatine back. He would start the contingency, just to win the war and get rid of the Jedi, but after that, the lifelong politician would play it by ear. If he could assume the role of Emperor without Palpatine, then why waste resources trying to bring him back? The Jedi and Moss agreed to do a funeral for Palpatine, the martyr who died for the stress of his cause. The Jedi were given a fake body filled with half of Palpatine's blood to be used for the memorial service. The real body was put into carbon freezing and transported to a secret lair on Naboo. It was an open casket, just something to put inside the casket that the Jedi could have after they were finished with the ceremony. The funeral of Sheev Palpatine went smoothly, and against the will of the Jedi Council, Amedda would declare a state of emergency, while dispatching 3 groups of commandos to Mustafar, Omega Squad, Delta Squad, and the Bad Batch. These units were given one simple command: shut down the droid army entirely. Amedda had all the command codes necessary, so he just quietly gave them out to the commandos so they could stop the CIS movement in its tracks. It was really pretty tragic for Dooku. He was in hyperspace when he learned that Palpatine died. The Count of the CIS prepared his return to Sereno, so he could take his armies and march on the Republic without any true resistance. Between the standing army and the reserve army, he could conquer this galaxy and 3 more just like it without worrying about resources. However, due to the shutdown command, one of the B-1 pilots on his Providence dreadnought slammed their cone head into the control panel. It sent a code to the reactor and ripped the ship out of hyperspace. Due to the sudden movement, the ship's core was detonated, and Dooku's flagship was pulled into oblivion over some distant moon in the mid-rim. The rest of the Separatist military shot down, so while Dooku was killed instantly, Admiral Trench and General Grievous had much more stressful deaths. The Spider Admiral was fighting with the Republic over Ringo Vinda. The siege had been on and off, and he was keeping the Republic at bay. As he was commanding his units from his command ship, his shields were ruptured by a heavy bombardment from the Republic. He perfectly moved a counter to defend himself, as he told his deck officers to reroute power to the bridge. Instead, they were shot down, and a loose Hyena bomber slammed into his bridge, killing him. Grievous, on the other hand, was in a land engagement, when all of his droids stopped working. He would eventually be surrounded and executed by clone troopers under the command of some random Jedi, one that would have otherwise been killed by Grievous in what would have been a crushing defeat. The Republic was winning the war with the flip of a switch, but Amedda kept up the ruse, because what politician would ever not lie? The state of emergency gifted him all the executive powers he needed, and he carefully moved between political rules and laws to ensure he could maintain his powers once the war was finished. So before Dooku, Trench, and Grievous died publicly, he had every power Palpatine once had, plus some. His excuse was over the death of their military leader. It was a brilliant play, because the war was corrupting the entire galaxy, and the Republic needed to have a strong leader during such a troublesome time. Most politicians didn't think twice about this, assuming Moss would hand his powers back afterwards. Again, he was a lifelong politician. He wouldn't ever become corrupt. But this was a politician. Of course he would use his power for his own gain. Amedda knew he could resurrect Palpatine, but as the days went by, he slowly realized that he didn't need to. He sunk the body of the Sith Lord so they could be feasted on by the fish of Naboo. This was his republic, and it would become his empire. He just needed to play this delicately. He had a good reputation with the Jedi, and instead of using Order 66, he'd make the Jedi cave in on themselves. They were already flying high because they killed 3 Sith, and Dooku was the last on their list of enemies. The Order was spread out working on restructuring the Order in the galaxy. The Neutral Systems Coalition was still strong, but shaky with Bo-Katan trying to fill her sister's shoes. Moss made sure his commando units used every single piece of information Palpatine had against the former Separatists. The CIS stood no chance against the Republic once these strategies were implemented, but Amedda knew something, and again, it was thanks to his good friend Palpatine. Moss was aware that the self-righteous Jedi couldn't stand for the idea of the Republic turning into an autocracy, so to make sure the system turned on the Jedi Order, Moss set himself up as the temporary executive branch. Essentially, he removed all power from the Senate itself, especially in the absence of Palpatine and his state of emergency. But very quickly and quietly, he used Palpatine's old allies to certify bills under the noses of the rest of the Senate. These bills were nothing more than gobbledygook to most people. They were framed as post-war bills, but in reality, they stripped the Republic from its power and gave it over to the executive leader. While the senators were focused on making amends with the now surrendering separatist government, the Jedi were watching Amedda fundamentally rip the Republic apart. Moss understood what Palpatine did. The Jedi were too morally right to allow something like this to happen, so Moss needed to set himself up as a martyr, make everything look like the Jedi were trying to implement themselves into the Republic, and then all Moss needed to do was allow the Jedi's political adversaries to get their hands dirty. He could sit back and watch as the Senate and Jedi fought for political leverage. All the while, he could fill his pockets with more credits and more power. It was truthfully brilliant, because everyone would be focused on fighting each other. The public would very quickly choose sides, because they would already be polarized by the war that just ended, so this conflict would become own the Senate or own the Jedi. And in the irony of all of it, the people themselves would lose out on their power in the officials they elected into government. Moss admired the brilliance of Palpatine, but he was extremely grateful that Palpatine gave these contingency orders over to him. Moss just had the political brilliance to navigate it. Up until Dooku's death, Moss would have followed them and made sure to resurrect Palpatine, but at this point, who cared? There was nothing Palpatine could do. At first, it made sense to bring Palpatine back, because Dooku was a cunning leader, but without his guidance, the CIS became very fragile. They were run on corporations, and those corporations no longer had power, especially after the droid shutdown. In the months following Palpatine's defeat, the fall of the CIS, and the rise of Amedda, the Republic itself would lose stability. The Neutral Systems Coalition coasted off of Satine's leadership prior to her death, and the CIS became part of the Republic again. But the part of the Republic that never rebelled or sided with Palpatine started to lose their strength. Their policies became radical. The Senate and the Jedi turned against each other, because the Council tried on numerous occasions to usurp Amedda from power. Instead of getting anywhere, the Jedi ran into the Coruscant Guard and Commander Fox, who protected their interim Chancellor as if he were Palpatine. It was a brilliant play, and with several political witnesses to the Jedi attempting to overthrow the government, the people became radicalized. The Jedi never tried overthrowing the Republic. What they did was attempt to address concerns within Senate sessions. The politicians loyal to Palpatine misconstrued their words, and used them publicly to make the people see what they feared all along, the fact that the Jedi were trying to use their magic powers to take control over the Republic, to try and become dictators, just like Dooku. And so what ended up happening was a systematic divide within the Republic. Palpatine's allies were able to gather a support base that saw the Jedi as perpetrators of the war, mostly because of Dooku, and then be able to view them as attempting to overthrow the Republic. The thing is, many of these people were everyday people, so what ended up happening is when the Jedi were backed up by other influential members of society, for example the new Duchess of Mandalore, it seemed like the Jedi chose sides with the rich and elite. There were some other long-standing issues within the Republic that led to this divide, and part of it came from the Clone Wars too, but it started a Republic civil war. The Jedi tried to maintain peace, and initially there were protests in front of the temple, but they slowly became violent. The people started fighting the Jedi, and all at once the first shot was fired, igniting a struggle between the Order and the people of the galaxy. They desperately tried to avoid this, and they pleaded with Amedda to end this conflict, a conversation of which Amedda quote-unquote accidentally leaked to the public. It was a horrendous situation for the Jedi, but it was a brilliant play devised by Palpatine and executed by Amedda. The whole point of this plan was to ensure that Palpatine could still become Emperor if something happened. While this plan was used in the circumstance that he died during the war, it was also created for the circumstance that the Republic overwhelmed the Separatists before he could execute Order 66. It was a good way to show the people of the Republic that the Chancellor or the singular leader of the Republic didn't exert his executive powers for control. Rather, the Jedi tried to exert their powers for control. The fight with the Jedi felt natural. It didn't come from the clones or from Moss, but their own ignorance in the eyes of the public. The Republic Civil War came 5 months after the peace treaty that ended the Clone Wars. The Jedi didn't want to fight, but it was a fight between the people of the Republic, the elite, the Senate, and the Jedi. In an accidental manner, the Jedi were able to get clones and regular citizens to mount up against the Senate. The clones were split on either side. Many of them still served the Senate, but they wouldn't fire on their own brothers. The Civil War existed mainly on Coruscant, which forced the Neutral Systems Coalition with Bo-Katan advised by Satine's greatest allies, and the former CIS to step up. The Neutral Systems took control over the galactic influence, which Moss, in a panic, tried to renounce with his absolute power, and it was his first mess-up in this entire process. The former CIS and Neutral Systems moved into one strong alliance, not separate from the Republic, but separate from the conflict. So in turn, it made Moss and his government look weak and powerless. Initially, Moss held down the fort. He maintained control over the situation, as war waged on Coruscant. Clones never killed Jedi, they stunned them, but the same didn't go for citizens. Midway through the war, the temple would be bombed by a Jedi, one that would join the citizens and eventually face death at the hands of her former friends. Moss waited patiently until the Jedi made a move on him, connecting all the issues of the post-Clone War era back to him. When the Jedi did, they broke their own code to do so, but in an effort to kill the current leader and ruler of the Republic, he executed Order 66, and then pandemonium followed. Not all the clones got the order. Citizens who fought with the Jedi were slaughtered, Jedi were killed. The council members who killed Moss looked responsible. It was a terrible mess. Order 66 would last for 4 long days. Coruscant would erupt like a volcano. Many people on the lower levels were waiting for this to break, so when the clones turned on each other, the fight got deadly. The lower level gangs and criminals banded together and waged conflict on the surface. The battle was terrible, but it resulted in a devastating calmness. The Battle of Coruscant took the lives of over 3 million people. This was combined clones, gangsters, civilians, senators, and Jedi. However, the galaxy watched a corrupt system lose its footing before regaining it. Moss, in a way, helped in what was necessary for the Republic itself, which was a great reset. Without the Sith and the Jedi, the Republic was its own greatest enemy, and that perhaps was Amedda's greatest failure to realize. He never saw how important Palpatine was to the puzzle. Without his influence, the Jedi and the Republic would settle their fallacies. They would come face to face with their own failures and issues. After they figured out what it meant to represent the people of the galaxy, they could begin to actually represent them. For the Republic, this meant upholding a structurally sound Republic and maintaining peace with the outskirts of the galaxy. And for the Jedi, this meant actually representing their code and serving the people of the galaxy. not the Republic nor its senators. Though the surprise from all of this was how the Duchess of Mandalore was able to come into her own as a political leader, one that her sister once was. Bo was very far removed from who Satine was, but she was able to fill the role with strength, compassion, and intelligence, all of which needed to guide the neutral systems. The presence of the Coalition would be required as a foundation for the restructuring of the Republic, without a strong executive role. It would also be, with Bo, that the Jedi would begin their outreach into the galaxy, starting with a Jedi outpost on Mandalore and beginning a new generation of Jedi Mandalorians. There weren't many of them, but it would allow the Order to welcome in hundreds of new members, especially after the chaos of Order 66. Those who perished in the Battle of Coruscant would be forever remembered, as their sacrifices paved the way for a future society, one that was strong and able to stop corruption, while also bringing forward a new golden era. That, my friends, is our story. And again, special thanks to our patrons: Benjamin Wells, Ozpin, Angel Dust, Alexandra Reese, The Beginning and End, Django Fat Clone, Nick5098, INTJ Recluse, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galavic Gaming, Tristan Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granity Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewa670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Knox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tam, John Nguyen, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Galaxy66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Photos Legacy Star Wars, Airbus, Rex the Wolf, Man 3 First Names, Dark Saint 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button, check out the Patreon, cool things on there. Let's talk about this story. So the second half of this video was how I wanted to have Palpatine's contingency plans screw Dooku over and then set him up for a potential empire. In the end, the Republic is reborn because Amedda didn't realize what Palpatine realized, was that the Republic and the Jedi needed to have a great reset. And I kind of wanted that theme to be very present. We've done enough of the Dooku does a really cool thing after Palpatine dies, and so I thought it'd be interesting to kind of take it to a place where Palpatine had something in plan in case something happened to him, so that Dooku couldn't win. Because I just feel like Palpatine's a jealous type. Like, I feel like he wouldn't want Dooku to succeed, even if he followed the rule of 2, which just seems really in Palpatine's kind of blood. So I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.